So this is Baruch. I'm back at the Tikkun Elevator Kollel, and we're going to start a series on the tales and praise of the ARI. It's a little bit stilted, the language, but we can get the idea of the stories. This book comes along with drawings, like Hasidic type drawings. It's a very beautiful idea. But before we start this, tales and praise of the ARI, I want to tell you also a story which I heard from Rabbi Mordechai Finkelman in a series that he used to do. I mean, it goes back probably 40 years that he was doing this. There were stories that he heard from a Hasidic Rebbe, and he produced them also in those days. It was cassette tapes, and I got it for my kids. The kids listened to it, and I know that they have this available somewhere, and they're doing it with their kids. Very interesting story. Let me tell you this story. Because we spend so much time talking about Spain. It's very interesting to me. It's very important to me for some reason. But whatever it is, I do speak a little Spanish. And I was around a lot of Latinos, especially people from Cuba. But it means a lot to me. The story goes like this. In the year 1492, the Jews were expelled from Spain. And it was a terrible, terrible time. People had to sell their possessions for, pennies on the dollar. They were forced out. They was given a specific date. That date, incidentally, was the same date that Columbus, who was a Marrano himself, they call him Conversos, he was a new Catholic, set sail from the harvest in a place called Palos in Sevilla, or down south, I'm not sure exactly where. And that's the man who discovered the Americas. Well, at the same time that this was going on, a terrible thing was happening. The Jews were being expelled from Spain. Now, the majority of the Jews, according to Dr. Chaim Beinart, 70% of the Jews who were expelled went to Portugal. That's a whole other story of what happened in Portugal. It's a terrible story. Which comes out where in the end, and 4 years later, the Jews were all forcibly converted to Catholicism. It's a terrible, terrible thing. In the meantime, those who managed to leave Spain had to leave Spain on, well, there are lots of different ways. As I said, 70% didn't get on a boat and go somewhere else. Instead, they went to Portugal, which was a terrible situation for them, living in refugee camps with diseases and it's just really a terrible place, ending up even worse. But many survived to go out into the Muslim world, because in the Muslim world, they're really asking for Jews to come to help build up their businesses, particularly the Turks. But the trip from Spain, and the harbors in Spain, was very, very hazardous. And many times the Jews were ransomed. Their boats they had to pay ransoms. They were starved. They were left without food and provisions and water in the middle of an ocean or in a harbor someplace where they couldn't get off the boat. And it stayed like this for long periods of time, but some. And it's a very interesting thing about the Jews in the middle of all of these things. There is always a remnant that survives and finds a way to prosper again and build up and start rebuilding. This happens over and over and over again. And this is a story called Mazal. So the story goes like this. There's a family of a man and his wife and the children. They've somehow managed to make their way across the Mediterranean into Alexandria, which was controlled at that time by the Turks. And when they came there, they had almost nothing. The expulsion took place in the summer, so now you're all the way around unto the springtime, and they arrive and they get a place to live, but they have virtually no money, and Pesach is coming. They have a few pennies or whatever the monetary system was in those days. And the man's wife said to him, now go out, buy a little bit of fish and some matzah, please. Bring it back. We want to have a Pesach at least for the last of our money. On the way to the place where the market, he passed the slave market. And there was a little Jewish girl, 3 years old. And they were auctioning her off. And at 3 years old, who would want a little Jewish slave girl? So he watched this, and his heart was broken, and they didn't want almost anything for her. As a matter of fact, he had enough money just to buy her. And he did. He came back to the house with the little girl. And he opens up the door, and the wife is waiting there, and she says, "Where's the food?" And he said, "I didn't get it. Instead, I got this little girl." Of course, it's a wonderful thing, but it's another mouth to feed with no food. He was broken. He just didn't know what to do for his family. And there's this little girl here now in rags, trying to get her, his wife went about trying to get her, to clean her up and to make her presentable, but there's no food. Everybody is hungry. All the children are crying. He goes outside and he sits on the street outside where he's living. And he's broken and he weeps and he weeps and he weeps and he does not know what to do. And the man comes up to him and he says, "Look, I need you to do me a favor." He said, "What?" He says, I need you to take this message that I have here, and he handed it to him. Is another man is going to come along, maybe a little bit later. And when he sees you, give him the note. So the man took the note. The man gave him a few kopecks, as a matter of fact, or whatever the money supplied was in those days. It was enough that that he could make up for what he lost when he bought the little girl. And then another man came, and the man came and he said, "You have that note?" And he said, "Yes." And the man gave him a little bit more money. Now he had the money for a nice Pesach. From one thing to the next, things got better and better for this man because he became known as a person you could trust. In a situation in which they're selling Jews in the slave markets, we somehow survived the trip from Spain into the Mediterranean across over to Africa. And this is the beginning of the story of the little girl whose name is Mazal. She brought him tremendous wealth, and he became an extremely wealthy man in Alexandria, Egypt. That's the first story. I just remembered it because it's so strong. How we managed to survive little by little by the acts of kindness of the Almighty.